There is a particular kind of person the world believes is safe. The one who reads people instantly. The one everyone else goes to for advice. The one who would never, could never, be fooled. And that is exactly the person who gets trapped the deepest. Because intelligence was never a wall against manipulation. Sometimes it's the door. What you're about to see isn't a story about weak people making foolish choices. It's about brilliant minds walking willingly into a cage, and then defending the lock. Picture the surgeon who saves strangers at 3 in the morning, then drives home to someone who tells her she's worthless. The lawyer who dismantles arguments for a living, who can't win a single one at his own kitchen table. The psychologist who treats trauma all day and goes home to the person causing hers. We assume that if you're smart enough, you'll see the trap. That understanding is protection. The people who study manipulation are not immune to it. The ones who can name every red flag can still bleed out behind one. So the question is not, why don't they just leave? The real question is far more unsettling. What if their intelligence is part of what keeps them there? Stay with me, and you'll see every gear of this machine, and you may never look at love or at your own mind the same way again. We have to begin by killing a comfortable myth that intelligence and rationality are the same thing. They are not. The psychologist Keith Stanovich spent decades documenting a strange gap he called dysrationalia, the failure to think rationally despite having more than enough intelligence to do it. An IQ test measures processing power. It does not measure whether you'll use that power for or against yourself. Here's the part that should disturb you. In studies of something called the bias blind spot, researchers found that the more cognitively sophisticated people were, the more certain they became that they personally were not biased. The smarter you believe you are, the less you audit yourself. Now add emotion to that engine. Decades ago, a psychologist named Leon Festinger described what happens inside us when two truths collide. When I'm a smart, rational person slams into I am staying with someone who is hurting me. He called it cognitive dissonance. The mind can't tolerate the contradiction, so it does something quietly catastrophic. It doesn't change the situation, it changes the story. In 1959, Festinger and James Carlsmith paid students to lie, to tell a stranger that a mind-numbing task was fascinating. One group was paid $20, the other a single dollar. And here's the twist that built a field. The people paid $1 ended up believing the lie more. With almost no outside reason to justify what they'd done, their minds manufactured an inside one. The less justification you have for staying, the harder your mind works to invent one. This is the engine of the intelligent captive. A brilliant mind is not a lie detector. It's a defense attorney, working around the clock to defend the very thing destroying it. Festinger watched this same machinery in a doomsday cult that only believed harder after the world failed to end. But the mind is only the first trap. The next one is built into the body itself. To understand the trap, you have to go back, long before this relationship, back to the very first one you ever had. The psychiatrist John Bowlby discovered that human beings are born running a survival program older than language. He called it the attachment system. As infants, closeness to our caregiver is literally life or death. So evolution wired us to cling. His colleague Mary Ainsworth watched it in a now famous experiment, The Strange Situation, separating toddlers from their mothers to see how they broke and how they healed. Some children learned the world was safe. Others learned that love was unpredictable, that the person you need most might comfort you or might not, and you can never quite tell which. That child grows up. In 1987, two researchers, Cindy Hazan and Philip Shaver, showed that those exact patterns reawaken in adult love. The anxiously attached don't love less. They love with the volume turned all the way up, the highs higher, the lows like falling, and to that nervous system, an unpredictable partner doesn't feel like a warning. It feels like home. Now enter the Manipulators' opening move, love bombing, a flood of affection, attention, certainty. I've never felt this way. You're my soulmate. It's you and me against the world. For someone wired for anxious love, this isn't a red flag. It's the answer to a lifelong ache. And then, it's taken away. The warmth cools. Affection becomes something you have to earn back. And so begins the most powerful bond in behavioral science. The therapist Patrick Carnes gave it a name, the trauma bond, not a metaphor. A measurable conditioning process, forged when the same person becomes both the source of your pain and the only source of relief from it. The trauma specialist Bessel van der Kolk put it plainly: the body keeps the score. Long after logic says go, the nervous system has already been rewritten to stay. But why the bond tightens at the exact moment it should break? That's where this story turns from sad to genuinely frightening. We need to talk about dopamine, but not the way you've heard. For years, people called it the pleasure chemical. It isn't. In the 1990s, the neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz recorded from single dopamine neurons, expecting them to fire with reward. At first, they did. He gave a monkey a sip of juice, and the neurons lit up. But once a light reliably predicted the juice, something uncanny happened. The neurons stopped firing for the juice. They fired for the light, for the anticipation. Dopamine isn't the feeling of getting, it's the engine of wanting. The neuroscientist Kent Berridge proved you can strip an animal of nearly all its dopamine, and it will still smile at sugar on its tongue. It still likes the reward. It just no longer wants it enough to cross the cage to reach it. Wanting and liking are two different systems. An addiction lives in wanting. Now ask, when do those neurons fire hardest? Not when the reward is reliable, when it's uncertain. This is what B.F. Skinner discovered with a lever and an animal that pressed it. A reward every single time is boring. But a reward that comes unpredictably, sometimes yes, sometimes nothing, produces behavior that is almost impossible to switch off. It's why slot machines are shaped exactly the way they are. The most addictive pattern ever found has a name: the variable ratio schedule. Now look at the toxic relationship again. The apology after the cruelty. The perfect day after the freezing week. A flash of the person you fell for, right as you'd finally resolved to leave. You are not weak. You are on a variable ratio schedule, administered by a human being. The intermittent kindness isn't relief from the trap. It is the trap. And the cruelest part is almost mathematical. The worse it gets, the more random the good moments become. And the more random they are, the harder your brain chases them. Which raises a terrible question. If staying is chemically addictive, what does leaving actually feel like? Leaving feels like withdrawal, because in part it is, but the chemistry is only half of it. The other half is a set of thinking traps so universal that mapping them won a Nobel Prize. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky discovered that human beings do not weigh losses and gains equally. A loss hurts about twice as much as the same-sized gain feels good. We are not built to maximize happiness. We are built to avoid loss. Now think about everything poured into years with someone, the time, the hope, the future you'd already half built in your head. To leave is to write all of it off. And the mind recoils from that loss as if from fire. Economists call it the sunk cost fallacy. The more we've already invested, the harder it is to walk away, even when every rational signal says go. But underneath the math is something older. The psychologist Martin Seligman built a famous theory of learned helplessness, that creatures who suffer things they can't control eventually stop trying to escape, even once escape becomes possible. For 50 years, that's how we read it. And then the science reversed. In 2016, Seligman and the neuroscientist Seligman Maier looked back across half a century of brain research and overturned their own conclusion. Passivity, they found, was never the thing that gets learned. Shutting down is the brain's default, its automatic response to prolonged pain. What has to be learned actively through the prefrontal cortex detecting that you can change your situation is control. Sit with that. Giving up isn't the failure of a strong mind. It's the factory setting of a suffering one. Hope and agency are the things that have to be switched back on. Now add the terror of uncertainty, the devil you know, against a void you can't even picture. Add an identity so fused with the relationship that who am I without this has no answer left. The cage door is open, and every instinct screams that the open door is the danger. But so far, we've only described what a brain does on its own. Next, what happens when someone learns to do it to you on purpose? Here is the uncomfortable truth about manipulation. The most effective kinds are designed, consciously or not, to turn your strengths into the weapon. Start with your grip on reality. In 1938, a playwright wrote about a husband who secretly dims the gaslights in the house, night after night, and insists his wife is imagining it, until she begins to doubt her own mind. We took the title and turned it into a verb. Gaslighting. And it works best on intelligent people, because they pride themselves on being reasonable, on being willing to consider that they might be wrong. A manipulator takes that humility and sharpens it into a blade. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. The sharper your mind, the more elaborately it can be convinced to distrust itself. Then there's the maneuver the researcher Jennifer Freyd named DARVO. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The abuser becomes the wounded party, and you, the one who was hurt, end up apologizing. Your empathy, your fairness, your willingness to see another side, all of it reforged into the bars of the cell. And Freyd found something deeper still. We carry a kind of betrayal blindness, an unconscious refusal to fully see the betrayal of someone we depend on, because to see it clearly would threaten the bond we need to survive. So the more you depend on them, the harder your own mind works not to see. The persuasion scientist Robert Cialdini showed how commitment tightens the knot. Once we've publicly chosen a person, we bend ourselves to stay consistent with that choice. Every anniversary, every time you defend them to a worried friend, the knot pulls tighter. And the psychiatrist Judith Herman, studying survivors of captivity, hostages, prisoners, cult escapees, found the coercive techniques were nearly identical to those in abusive homes. Isolation, unpredictable punishment, the occasional, perfectly timed mercy. The same playbook that breaks a prisoner of war can break a person who simply fell in love. You may be thinking of Stockholm Syndrome, but here the science gets careful. That term isn't a recognized diagnosis. The evidence is thin and contested, built mostly on a handful of cases. What's really happening has a sturdier name, the trauma bond. And unlike a hostage crisis which ends, this one is reinforced every single day. So if the trap is this deep, this engineered, this invisible, how does anyone ever get out? The way out does not begin with leaving, it begins with seeing. Every mechanism in this film shares one weakness. They all depend on staying invisible. The trauma bond works because it feels like love, not conditioning. The dopamine loop works because the craving feels like longing. The dissonance works because the rationalizations feel like your own conclusions. Name the mechanism, and it begins to lose its grip. This isn't love pulling me back, it's a variable ratio schedule. This isn't my judgment, it's dissonance, writing me a story. This isn't safety, it's only the devil I know. Remember Seligman and Maier. Control is something the prefrontal cortex learns by detecting that change is possible. Every time you name the trap, you are switching that circuit back on. Judith Herman found that recovery from this kind of captivity moves in stages, and it almost never happens alone. It begins with safety, with reconnecting to the people that isolation stripped away, with one outside voice that says, what you're living through is real, and the single most powerful act is often the smallest, telling one true thing to one trusted person. Breaking the secrecy the whole trap depends on. It also means grieving, not just the person, but the future you'd built for them in your head, the story you were so brilliant at defending. Because the mind that can construct 100 reasons to stay can be turned slowly to construct one honest reason to go. So we return to where we began, the surgeon, the lawyer, the psychologist, not foolish people, brilliant ones, whose brilliance was quietly conscripted to defend the very thing breaking them. If this is you, understand this. Your intelligence was never the problem, and it was never going to be the rescue. Awareness is the willingness to see the machinery and to let someone help you switch the lights back on, because the most dangerous prison was never built with walls. It has no bars, no lock, no guard. It's built with hope. The hope that tomorrow they'll finally go back to who they were at the very first day. And the moment you stop waiting for that day to save you is the moment you realize the door was always open. If you watch this and recognize someone, yourself or somebody you love, you're not broken and you're not alone. Sit with that for a moment. And if these are the questions you can't stop turning over, stay a while. We explore them here, one at a time, together.